Oh, welcome back to a great Monday show. You know, Albert Breer was musing. It wasn't a report. It was just a musing. That Belichick was less than thrilled with Mac Jones. And theoretically, maybe it was amusing. It was kind of just talk show fodder. That he could be open to trading Mac Jones, maybe to the Raiders, maybe not, because Josh McDaniels is there. Again, Brew, you know how it is in the offseason. You put out kind of an informed idea, and next thing you know, it gets aggregated, and people are saying this is a report, and it's not necessarily true. So, Coach Mangini is here.
Good. Hey, Coach.
That's just to give
we
you a
haven't
full
seen you since
perspective.
Super Bowl.
I
Just
know.
real quick, is there anything you want to say?
It's good to be back.
Okay. All right. That's fine. Didn't go the way I thought it would.
It's good to be back. Let's talk about the Patriots.
Okay.
Nick, would you like to go first on this question? I highlighted, should the Patriots trade the baby goat?
I mean,
you wanted to read this. And
No,
I
I
said
just,
no.
you in the meeting literally said, well, write whatever you want, Hubs, but I won't read that.
Well.
And yelled at our wonderful producer, Stephen Hubbard, when he put this question in there. So I just want you, listen, what Albert Breer, what you're calling musing, I call
musing.
very informed reporting, because he is reporting what my old gut instinct told me all year, which is that Belichick doesn't like the way Matt carried himself this year.
Oh, heaven forbid.
That Belichick didn't like the fact that the offense seemed to be, handcuffed, and then the two games they were explosive was when old Zappum was in there, and that there isn't a big gap between them. So that's what I already thought, and I didn't have the sources on Albert Breer. You're the one, though, that's tied yourself to this guy.
Yeah.
So what do you think of it?
Well, here's what I think, Broussard and Coach. And, Coach, I'll address you because I know that you value development
I do.
of players.
I do.
Now, imagine, I'll just pick something random. I got a beautiful little plant from the nursery.
Nurse?
This is a serious topic. I got a beautiful little plant. In year one, I watered this plant, and I gave it sunshine, and I gave it a good playbook, and it started to flower, and it made the playoffs, and it hit the gritty in the Pro Bowl. And then year two, I said, I have a new idea for this house plant of mine. I'm going to put it in the cabinet and put little pieces of glass in it and orange Fanta. And then, should I be shocked when it doesn't flower and bloom purposely? And when it doesn't, whose fault is that? Is it the plant's fault, or is it my fault, whose responsibility it was to have this plant bloom and become...
How many trademarks did the plant file for during his first year?
Probably not enough. So that's what was frustrating to me. And any talk were like, well, Belichick, he didn't like the way Mac Jones, did this to Matt Patricia and kind of mouthed off a little bit. He was right. Robert Kraft had to step in and be like, hey, by the way, let's move on and bring in Bill O'Brien so we have a new offensive coordinator because our offense was no good. So I don't know what we're supposed to be mad at. The guy was great the first year, didn't get an offensive coordinator, got pushed to the ground by Chandler Jones, and then got Matt Patricia gone and a new OC in. So it would be foolish for us to trade him because his lack of development is on the coaching staff, not him. That's my take.
That's a great take.
That is.
So I don't know where Albert got this from, because I doubt anybody in the organization is talking specifically about Mac Jones's relationship and his relationship to Bailey Zappi from a talent standpoint. But I do think when you talk about gaps, you got to talk about what gap are we looking at? Are we saying that these are two players that aren't very good and there's a very small gap between them? Or are we saying that that they're both very good and there's a very small gap between them? You got to really look at the ceiling as opposed to the gap and which one has the better chance to grow. And I do agree with you, Wilds, that he did a lot of good things his first year, a ton of good things that you could be encouraged by. They spent a first-round draft pick on him. They experimented with an untraditional way of running the offense. That didn't work. They bring back Bill O'Brien. You've got to give that guy a chance. You've got to see whether Mac Jones can be more in line with what he was as a first-year player or whether he is what he showed this past season. So I can't imagine they would trade him. And just because Josh is in Las Vegas doesn't mean that he necessarily wants him either. I think that's just a convenient place to push the narrative.
I agree with you guys, and I think Nick will even like this point.
Oh, good.
What did Nick do with Trevor Lawrence after his first year in a sea of dysfunction? He gave him a mulligan. You said, oh, that doesn't even count.
Great take, bro.
Great.
I think Mac Jones, Nick, should get a mulligan
Great
for
take.
last year. And
Your
this
own
is
take.
not second guessing. I said it as soon as they hired, Patricia and Judge to run the offense. This is lunacy. And that's what it was. And I say, now you got Bill O'Brien, but don't just, I don't know if they can do this, but you've mentioned it. Go get him a receiver,
Thank
too.
you. Hello.
Trade
Okay,
for
just because
DeAndre. Get him
Tom
more
Brady
help.
could make great players out of mediocre ones doesn't mean every quarterback can do it. Can we get him a legit receiver?
Real quick, before we move
Like a
on,
number one?
It's like old presidential debates. You invoked my name, so I get to respond. The distinction here is, and the reason Wilds should be terrified of this is the reason I gave Trevor Lawrence a mulligan was he was on this one trajectory his entire career, had this horrible year, and then resumed it. And all of the smart football people said this guy could be a star. The reason the Mac Jones thing should be terrifying is all the smart football people said limited upside, will come in pro ready, and then will almost instantly reach his ceiling. And what did we see?
People.
We saw a limited upside, and we saw did this year not go exactly the way I told you?
Those
his rookie
same
year it
smart
would?
football people had Zach Wilson going second in the draft.
No,
and Trey
they
Lance,
didn't.
who couldn't beat out.
No, they
yes,
didn't.
they did. The smart football people
Nobody liked
love Trey Lance and they love Zach Wilson.
And I think Bill Belichick, you could argue,
Would
is a
qualify as a
smart
smart
person, and he felt there was upside.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mac,
Don't trade.
I believe in you. Free agent Derek Carr visited the New York Jets, had dinner or lunch. Jets looking for a new quarterback after giving up on third overall pick Sam Darnold for second overall pick Zach Wilson, who they then soon gave up on as well. Brew, would Derek Carr make the Jets a playoff team? No.
Go ahead, bro. This is just answer.
Okay. The AFC is so deep. My goodness, it's hard to predict for these teams that'll be grouped together. But I'm leaning yes. I think they'll be much better. All right. The Derek Carr, coach, has never had a defense in his 9 years with the Raiders within the top 20. Okay, now you're talking about a top 5 defense. You're talking about a great young receiver in Garrett Wilson. Assuming they get Breece Hall back, you're talking about a good running back. Like, they do need to improve the offensive line. But I think Derek Carr is the way to go for them. Aaron Rodgers would obviously cost more. You'd have to give up some draft picks. Go get
way
Derek
older.
Carr. He's much younger. He could be your quarterback for the next 4
He's not
years.
currently sitting in darkness.
Yeah, right there you go.
Contemplating the
I
universe.
think Carr is the way to go, and I do think they'd have a great shot. They could be the second best team in that division, depending on
They
what
could be
happens
the
with
best
Tua.
team in that division.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off that, and let's take a look at the numbers, because you talked about how bad that defense was that he dealt with. So this is over
Over his career?
career.
That's
okay?
not good.
Wow.
So these are the defenses he's
That's
dealt
worse
with.
than I
Last
thought.
yards per game, 29th, yards per play, 30th, pass TDs, 31st, sacks last. So you've got that, and now fast forward to where the Jets were last season. Now you're talking
Pretty
about fourth, second, first, seventh. So when you transition into a situation where you don't have to consistently carry the team, where the pressure's not all on you, and where it's complementary football, it's a totally different equation. And he's never experienced that, but he's still had a decent level of success. I think he's a good person. I think he's a good teammate. He's looking for a long-term situation as opposed to Aaron Rodgers, where it's going to be very short-term. And where it helps the Jets is they don't have to give up draft picks. And they're going to have some certainty as to what they're paying the quarterback position, so they can plan for free agency in a different spot than wondering, what they're going to do at the biggest position of need and the biggest position on the team.
They had a bottom 3 quarterback situation in the NFL this year, and they were, en route to making the playoffs until the final month. They have the offensive rookie of the year and the defensive rookie of the year, and a guy who could have won offensive rookie of the year got hurt, and then in Hall, and he'll be back. I think they absolutely, to me, I'd pick them to make the playoffs with this roster if they got Carr. And you said I'm not saying I'd pick them to win the AFC East, but they absolutely would be in contention with Buffalo, depending on what both teams do. There's a lot of offseason to go. But yeah, they got negative value out of this position last year. If you just get a league average quarterback, and I think Carr's slightly above that, I think they could be a dangerous team.
And what are you doing with Zach Wilson? Do you keep him on the team, or do you got to?
Well, here would be the great thing for Zach Wilson in that spot is at least he'd have a veteran that he could sit behind and learn from. And look, I know that they had some veteran leadership later in the year, but he didn't start his career in that situation. So maybe being able to sit back, take some time, and learn from someone, when he gets his next opportunity, he'll be in a much better spot.
Okay. Coming up next, we're talking about Eric Bieniemy going to the Commanders next. First things first.